I am stoked to be in this particular stream, chairing this stream. I love this stuff. So legal, ethical, privacy, compliance, love it. Really excited to hear from our speakers this morning, and I hope you all feel the same. So I'll pass you straight over to Serryn O'Regan, who will speak on facilitating risk monitoring and crisis management procedures to establish proactive platforms. Serryn has 30 years experience in business and law with a specialisation in education. Having led legal deals worth up to $2.4 billion in the 1990s and worked in 3 heavily regulated industries, Serryn is adept at navigating a complex environment and making it all about quality. So please join me in welcoming Serryn.
We've got an intimate little room. Love it. Thank you all for coming. I didn't want to make this too dry, so I'm going to make it we're just going to have a chat, and if you've got questions, you are very, very welcome to ask them. So talking about risk monitoring and crisis management, we definitely need to be addressing this. Social media is a massive part of our lives and our work, our organisations. It's everywhere. And when something goes off on social media, it takes off very quickly, as we know, and sometimes that's a good thing and sometimes it's not. So I want to talk about that part of it today, just so that we're practically aware. We can have procedures that cover the types of things that I'm going to talk about today, but procedures themselves are not going to actually address what we want to address here. We have to have a depth of awareness and understanding within the organisation or agency as a whole. So everybody needs to be aware that by using social media, either on behalf of the agency or organisation that you work for, or in your own accord, actually has an effect, and we have a responsibility for that. So primarily, having people within the team be aware of the impact of social media. By all means, use it, but use it responsibly is probably number one. I'm sure you all agree. Yeah. So staff need to be trained in that regard, because it's not just a matter of flicking off a post, which is so easy to do. It's like, you comment on something without maybe thinking of the ramifications or without reading the whole post that you're commenting on. If you have a senior or public position within an agency or organisation, then that can have an impact, because then even if you're posting in your personal capacity, you're seen in your public light. So people will then take what you post and actually associate it with your professional life. So people need to be aware of that, and they're not always, because it's a little bit off the cuff. Like, people respond to social media so quickly, they don't always think, and they don't realise that a little post can actually have a big impact. That makes sense too, doesn't it? Yeah, everyone's nodding. That's great. So the other thing that I think is worth mentioning is active monitoring. Now, that sounds really obvious, but monitoring where your organisation or agency is being mentioned, which can be done via automation, or it can be done via a team member who's actually taking that on as an active role. But it's important to stay on top of or be across where your agency or organisation is being mentioned and in what way, so that you're aware of that. Because sometimes, because that's the next thing I want to talk about, is negative threads that develop and they get a life of their own. If that happens, you want to know about it early, and you want to be able to act early. So if something has taken off on social media and it's not actually positive, it may contain a lot of misinformation, potentially. It may just be someone venting, which is not really even about you and your organisation. It might just be them literally having a bad day. This happens. and then they just decide that they're going to publish something, and then a whole stack of people agree with it, and next thing you know, you look at something that's built up and you say, how did that actually get any life when it's not actually even true? So to be able, this is part of risk monitoring and crisis management, because you need to see early on if something like that has actually been given life, and you need to get in there early and correct misinformation and just give a very factual, simple reply that cuts it. So it doesn't feed any drama, it keeps things very simple, very practical and very factual, and just states something along those lines that actually just cuts the fact that this thing means anything, because it doesn't. And usually a very sharp statement to that effect will end it, and whoever is responsible for it usually just backs off at that point. But that getting in early is important, because if you let that sort of thing develop, it actually does get a life of its own. And then, you know, one person's friends will all, you know, the people that they're linked to, they're all going to see it, then it goes on, you know, the branches are just endless. So it is very, very important in terms of risk management and crisis management, risk monitoring and crisis management, to make sure that you're on top of things like that. Not the nicest topic to have to consider, but it's part of our reality today, so we do need to be aware of it. Yeah. Has anyone in the audience had an experience with anything like that? Maybe? Do you want to say?
Yeah, actually, a question on that.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you say, like, you've got to have your statement about not, you know, like, really...
Not feed it.
Yeah, not feeding into it. But I'm from the dead life, and we often have people who comment who have already set views. And I find it interesting, like, we've got people who are anti-vaxxers.
Yes.
And there's lots of misinformation on that.
Great, thanks, Jen.
Thank you. Yeah, so we've got people who've got set views.
Yes.
Sometimes not engaging with them has been really helpful for us, because if you engage with them, they've already got their set view. They actually aren't open to listening to...
Totally agree.
Yeah.
That's great, because that fleshes out what I was saying, because that definitely exists as well, and I think that's very wise. So there are times when something is being given life and you actually need to correct the information because it's saying stuff about your organisation or your agency or your work that is simply not true and not factual. So you just very simply address it, which generally will cease it. And then you've got people who just have an agenda, and if you engage them, they are going to go off. It's actually going to inflame it, and that actually also, it's like what you don't want to feed what's happening. So sometimes it will be by cutting it through a simple factual statement, and sometimes it will be by simply not giving it any oxygen at all. So that's a fantastic point, and thank you, because that rounds out what I was saying. Cool. And the rest of you then haven't had an experience like that, which is fantastic, and I hope you never do. You have? Do you want to say anything? You don't? Okay. Cool. We have a microphone. Yeah, thanks heaps.
I was just really acknowledging that we have. I don't know if I've got a lot more to add, but my name's Julie. I'm from Northern Beaches Council. We're one of, I work in Kath's team. She spoke earlier on the panel.
Thanks,
so we often have, you know, trolls or people in the community who might just start conversations like that. So we kind of have mechanisms in place where we, sometimes they're repeating offenders or frequent flyers, and we kind of have learnt to see who they are. But we definitely don't engage and don't try and inflame the situation. We have, you know, always have FAQs or we'll point them to where the facts are with a link on the website, and just kind of try and keep the communication to a minimum, really.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Julie. That's awesome. Again, super practical advice, which in the end I think is the most important thing, because like I said, you can have all your procedures and everything, but if It's what actually happens practically that matters. And I'm saying that as a lawyer, which is, I shouldn't really be saying, but it is actually true. So definitely have your documentation in order, like you need to have that. But if that's where you leave it and think we've ticked that box, then you're falling short of your responsibility because it's not enough. And that it never is with policies and procedures. You have them, yes, so everybody knows what to do and there's a consistency across your organisation or your agency, but it's the implementation and the monitoring of that, the constant refinement of that, that actually keeps you on top of what you need to be on top of, keeps you agile and responsive to what's coming towards you so that you stay relevant and you're not back-footing what's happening. And that's really key, especially in a day and age where information moves so quickly and things grow and get a life that they shouldn't have. That makes sense. And then probably the counterpart to that is the importance of making it about people. And I know that sounds so obvious, but also in an age where things are so fast that sometimes we get a little bit focused on the task and we can sometimes forget that it truly is about people at the end of the day, first and foremost. So we need to keep that at the top of our minds, really, or the forefront of our minds in everything that we do, because it's never just a task. We're never just doing something to tick a box or just to flick it off. Like actually the way that we do things and the way that they're going to be received by people at the end and what they're going to think about us and the organisation that we represent is everything. Yeah, it makes sense. Again, lots of nods. Thank you. That's awesome. Another practical thing that I just wanted to raise is data. Obviously, data ownership and all of that, privacy, are critically important in today's day and age. So I'm going to presume that you're across the basics. So the Australian Privacy Principles, the Privacy Act, I'm going to presume you're across that. If you're working in government, you need to know those things. And there are plenty of guidelines and summaries on the internet that you can look for more information if you would like to look that up. But I'm not going to go through the principles because I'm going to presume you have some awareness of them. But what I do want to point out is be aware of who your third-party service providers are. And look out for what happens, like where are their servers located, and if there's any trouble occurring in those particular countries, and also letting your, I don't know what you would call them because you're all from different types of organisations, but your customers or your clientele, making sure they're aware of any third parties that you use. You need to have that in your privacy policy. You may already have that, but just make sure that that's covered because you need to let people know where their data may end up. So you can have a simple statement like we use third-party providers such as whatever they are for the purpose of sending out bulk emails to you, to all of our clientele to update them about our activities or whatever it is, or to send out newsletters or whatever it is. Like you might have a provider that actually provides that service where the bulk email goes out so that they can see, oh, you're not selling our data, but you are using someone to transmit bulk messages. So something like that should be in your privacy policy so that they're aware of that and that they know where data is going to end up. Then the other thing that's related to that is if any of the third-party service providers that you use is sold, then it's good for you to be aware of that because who they are sold to is very important because you need to know who is potentially receiving the private information or sensitive information which could just be contact details, or it could be a little bit more in some situations, and what is potentially going to happen to that. Because at the end of the day, if someone has given you their private information and it ends up in someone's hands that misuses it, they're going to come back to you and say, why did you allow this to happen? So you need to be prepared. So stay on top of what third parties you're using and then what happens to them. See if there's a sale or a merger or whatever, you just need to know. It's like, does that mean then that you should readdress who you're using? Maybe, like actually have a look and look at the terms and conditions. It's extremely boring and they go on for ages and ages, and a lot of them just say we can do everything and we own your data and blah, blah, blah. Some of that, like Microsoft, it's a bit difficult for us to say, well, I'm not going to use you then because we all depend on it. But with some third-party providers, just have a look at what they are giving themselves the right to do with your clients or your customers' data so that you know. Does that make sense? Is everyone clear about that? Okay, cool, because that is definitely important. So just being, even without a sale or a merger, being aware of what the terms and conditions are for the third parties that you're using. And then making sure that your privacy policy covers that in a general way. The next thing I want to talk about is AI. So obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but it is becoming a pretty solid part of our day-to-day world. Whether you like it or not, it's there, it's being used. So addressing the way that people use AI for communications is important. So making sure that your team, your organisation, your agency, you may have a policy in there, or if you're working for government, it may actually say what you're allowed to do in terms of Gen AI, etc., or not. But if it is being used, you need to verify it, and then you need to edit what it actually says, and basically just revise it to actually apply to your agency or your organisation. Because what Gen AI comes up with is not necessarily correct. I know that's like a bit disappointing if you wanted to rely on it, and especially when people think it's a time saver. It definitely is, but use it like a smart search engine where it can do background work for you. So like say you've got an intern and they go out and they do research for you and come back with information, but they're new at it, they don't necessarily know a lot about the area. You need to sense check what it comes back with to make sure that it's actually correct, because information may not be. And if you then publish something in a social media post or wherever it might be that actually has incorrect information on it because you've relied on what Gen AI came up with, then you're responsible for that. So just make sure that you check it, and that in any event you don't just use it blanket. Like even if you've checked it and it's correct, you don't just use it, you actually tailor it so that it comes with that. It comes with an approach and a style and a tone that fits with your organisation or your agency. Because again, it's all about people. And when we receive messages that have been spewed out by a robot, we can tell. So there's no care in them. And we can tell when we receive a message like that, and we tend to not read it. Like we all get so much information that when you can see that something is basically just automated, you are very unlikely to read it. So if that's us, then imagine what our customers or our clients are like. They're going to feel the same way. So personalize it, make it actually relevant to them, because whatever robot is spitting out the information that you've requested is not going to be able to add that touch. And it will become smarter over time. And our college, Equinim College, it's not that, oh yeah, that is the one. Equinim College teaches IT, so like we're very aware of advances in this area, but even so, you do need to personalise and make sure that it always remains about people. See what we're up to here in time. You are still cool. Okay, so if a crisis arises, you don't want to be caught on the back foot. So you want to be prepared, and not just you, but you want your whole team to be prepared, because you don't want to be dealing with a crisis in reaction and with any panic. You want to be very steady, and you want to be together, unified as a team, and having a very sensible approach. So it's one of the things we teach is cybersecurity. It's similar. So if there's a data breach or something terrible occurs in terms of a cyber attack, it's the same thing. You want to be prepared so that you are ready, and you and your team know what to do if something occurs. Same with a social media, just something negative taking off. As a team, you need to be unified and you need to be prepared. So think through the types of things that can potentially occur, and then have a plan so that you might even have the basis of a communication. I'm sort of slipping into a little bit of the cybersecurity area, but it's good because it's prominent in our minds because we read in the media about the attacks that are occurring. If you have a communication that is in general ready to go, that you can post if it's needed, hopefully it will never be needed. That's what we all want. But if it does actually occur, you've got something sitting there that you can then tailor for the particular situation and either email out, social media message out, or put on your website. But being as prepared as possible is going to assist you so that you don't react, because you want your voice through social media or through whatever channel you use to be very steady. And the key with it is you communicate early, and you communicate factually and simply and responsibly, so that your clientele or customers can see that you are taking responsibility. If there's something that you need to check into and you're just letting them know about something, then you tell them, because that's reassuring for people, and it means a lot to them. Transparent communications mean a lot to people, because they then will settle, rather than them going off in their head and running stories about, oh, they don't care, this is going to happen to me, I'm really worried. That's what then gets up in the morning thinking through that all night. They're tired, they're worried, and then they start to, say stuff on social media which doesn't actually help anyone. So communications early and practically, simply and transparently, taking responsibility is going to help a lot. If this ever arises, and again, I sincerely hope it never does for any of you, but we can't say for sure that is. So that is the case. So being prepared is very, very important. And then the role with that is that all of that generates or helps to generate public trust. So they have trust in you, and people don't expect you to be perfect, because people do know that we're not perfect. They do know that. So if you are taking responsibility, and it's like, we've noticed this, we're on it, this is what we're doing, it will settle them. And your communications should have the aim of actually reassuring and settling your customers or clientele or whoever it is, or residents if you're in a council. But that's the aim, because that then builds public trust through that reassurance, and them knowing that they can trust you. It's huge. It's huge for people, and generally that will settle them down. So that's a basic rundown in a practical sense, because I could take you through policies and procedures and stuff, but it's not really going to help you at the end of the day. So I wanted to give you some things that would potentially just give you something to think about and actually prepare to augment or support what you're already doing. Yeah? So let me just look at the time. We've only got 3 minutes left. But does anyone have any comments or any questions, anything that they would like to share? Yep, got 2 here in the same row. Thank you.
So I just, I do agree with the advice if there is a crisis or something that there might be uncertainty about, to communicate early and to communicate about it first.
Yeah.
I work in a place where there's a bit of hesitancy to do that. That first they want to wait and see or monitor the situation, or they don't necessarily want to call attention to something not being quite right. Do you
Very
have any
valid
advice for those situations?
Yeah, no, that's great. I love it. It's like your question before. It just rounds out what I was saying. So, like, you know, that's fantastic, because you need to, yeah, you don't want to shoot off the hip in anything ever, especially not when it comes to something that could have reputational ramifications for you or your agency or organisation. So that's an extremely important question. So part of what I was saying, and what I didn't actually say, but it is part of it, is do your preparation. Obviously, if something happens, investigate it. Like, actually check what's going on. Where did this come from? Is there any truth in it? Is this likely to happen again? Is it building any life? Is it getting oxygen? You know, what do we actually need to do here, so that you are informed before you act? But that all needs to happen very quickly, because things happen so fast on social media that we do need to make sure that we respond very quickly. So does that help? Yeah, thank you. And as well?
My name is Gina, and I am the social media lead from the University of Adelaide.
Yep.
As I'm sure you would understand, coming from a college, we deal with, news stories and crises and stuff that's small and big all the time.
Yep.
I work really closely with our comms and our media teams, particularly in times of crisis and issues management. However, my question is, if we're seeing a potential crisis swelling, particularly in the media or in sort of outside of social media, essentially, I guess, should we risk so you're saying getting on top of it early and kind of coming out with a firm message quite early on with a sort of to tackle it as early as possible. Should we risk doing that and coming out with a message on social media to correct misinformation or to clarify a potential crisis? If that conversation is not already happening on social media, if that's not being talked about on social media, should we risk essentially bringing that drama over to our social channels?
Yeah.
Or should we kind of address it in other forums?
That's perfect. I love it. I love all of your questions. They're just completely awesome. So this is a risk-benefit analysis that you're going to perform at the time. So I've given you general principles, but basically what I said, I would qualify that and say that's if something has too much oxygen and it's actually being fed and it's just taking off. It's very important to correct it and just squash it, like you just kill it. Yep, which is actually easy to do. But when you do that, depends on the situation, and you have to, as a team member, so whoever is responsible for this in your organisation, you need to weigh up what the risks are and what the benefits are. So again, you just, by thinking through these things in advance, and the questions are showing that you already are, which is fantastic, means that you are going to be prepared to the best extent that you can be, although that won't be perfect. Situations will arise that you haven't thought of, and that's fine, because you can tailor your preparation from other areas, or that will help you to then look at something and say, you know, this is actually similar to that, and we're very clear about what we would do in that situation. I think the same applies here, and someone else might say, well, we need to take this into account as well, or this is what I saw this morning on social or whatever. So it's timing. So I wouldn't necessarily say that you should, if something's happening, say, on the internet, but it hasn't gone onto social yet, you wouldn't necessarily bring it on there because your clientele, your students, etc., may not have seen that, and then you're engaging them. So, and I know you know that, which is why you asked the question. So you need to look at what the risks are and how much life this other thing has, and is it going to, so it's not possible to give a definitive answer to use in each case, but the types of questions you would ask would be, how much life has this got on the internet? Has it got media? Like, is it actually in the media? Because if it's in the media, it's out there, and in that case, if there is misinformation, I would be correcting it. But if it hasn't got life, as in it's quite isolated, then it may be too much of a risk to actually take that across to social media and then inform a whole lot of people that just all that's going to do is bring a whole stack of questions. What does this, people will be genuinely asking, and rightly so, what does this mean for me? Or you told me this and now you're saying this. Like, you don't want to create issues. So you need to be very clear, but to do that, you need to be looking at what the risks are that are being presented from the situation that is before you. So, and if you look at that as being, it's not necessarily going to be a right and wrong answer. It's not necessarily going to be simple as to what to do, but if you take it as a weighing up of risks and benefits and you collaborate as a team, then you're going to know what to do. And it's going to be a matter of responding and making sure at that point that however you respond, it's not defensive and it's not justifying, but it is factual and simple and clear. And as I said before, transparent, which also means responsible. And people respond very well to messages like that. So don't overdo it and don't explain a whole stack of stuff and don't try and defend, because it puts people off and they just look at it and go, why are you saying that to me? It just makes me look like you're lying or you're trying to cover something up. Just be clear. People make mistakes, things happen. If it comes to that and you have to say something, you just deal with it, you know. People have got through some very, very difficult situations by applying that sort of principle, and people respond very well to it. Does that answer your question? You're welcome to talk to me more if you need more. Cool. Okay, so I think we're a little bit over time, so we'll wrap up there. 5 minutes. Got 5 minutes? Okay, cool. Any other questions? Yep, we've got a couple. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Mine's actually more of a comment, which is a bit self-indulgent, but I'll keep it short.
Great.
I'm Lauren. I'm with the New South Wales Department of Climate Change currently, but in a previous life, I worked on the COVID campaign with my former colleague Rachel here as well. So we were very much in the trenches on anti-vaxxers, which I know have been touched on here, vaccine rollout, lockdown restrictions, etc. And one thing I just wanted to add was the importance of making sure you have the right people in the job responding to people. And by that, I mean things like already championing that transparency, when to respond. I think we've called out a few examples here of when people might be feeling a bit emotional, which certainly they were around COVID, lockdown, vaccines, when they're sort of just looking for a reaction. But generally, we found that being government, people do really appreciate a response. There is that trust-building element you spoke about in that they very much see you as a sort of cold, faceless government. So there is plenty of opportunity to respond and build that trust. And to that end, I think having people in the role who can also advocate for the importance of responding. And having been in other government departments where a lot of departments go, no, we're not going to engage at all, don't respond, just ignore. actually, I think having people who are very experienced community managers who can talk to the importance of responding, the merits in responding, and perhaps even showing, here we responded and this person was really genuinely surprised and perhaps then thought favourably on the government in future interactions. So I think community management is a really big skill set that we're going to see more and more of, and I think putting the right people in the role is key to managing risk.
That's fantastic. Couldn't agree more. That's awesome. And I'll actually just add one thing to that because it's very beautiful. When there's a complaint or negative feedback or just anything sort of along those lines, even if it's not true, the way that you deal with the person is actually a marketing opportunity. I know that sounds a bit cold and callous, but it's actually not, because it's more accurately described as a potential for building the relationship with that person. And if you build a relationship with one of your customers, clientele, community members, whoever it is that is in your remit, if you like, then they will become an advocate for you and your work, which don't be shy of making that one of your objectives, because you know that you're doing good work. You obviously all care, or you wouldn't be sitting in this room. So it's not about that. Don't be shy about promoting the good work that you do. So you don't even have to ask them to go and speak for you. They will. We all know that. If we have an amazing experience, especially today, when in this day and age, when we deal with a company, organisation, anything, agency, whatever it is, and we get really excellent customer service, we are genuinely so surprised, because you just don't get that everywhere. So if you actually receive that, you are very likely to tell someone. Yeah, or if someone says, oh, I had a bad experience with X, and you haven't, you had the opposite, you're likely to say, oh, I didn't find that at all. They were actually fantastic. I was on the phone to them yesterday, they were amazing. I had this problem and they did everything they could. They were really responsive. So it is actually a marketing asset that you should not be embarrassed or shy about utilising and maximising, because in the end, your job, whatever you're doing, is about people. So looking after people is everything. But looking after people and seeing that then has a feedback mechanism back into the organisation again, which is going to further support and build what you're doing as a whole, that's great. Everybody wins. So don't be shy about the great work that you do as well, and make it about people. It's critical to everything, and that's how we succeed. We succeed by looking after people, not by putting anything else first. Over to you.
I think we've run out of time for questions.
Okay, sorry about that. We just one tiny little one.
Is that all right?
Go for it.
I'm not sure if it is going to be tiny, but I'm Virginia from CSIRO Publishing, and we had an incident a while ago which makes me wonder, what is your advice for not just dealing with external people, but internal stakeholders on risk management? So we had an incident where, the marketing team, which I sit within, advised one thing, comms advised another thing, our legal team advised another thing, and our director wanted something else. And ultimately, it went back and forth so much that actually the crisis that was happening externally kind of petered out, which maybe was good news, but we never reacted to it. We never responded to it, because basically no one could agree on what the appropriate response was. As a social media manager, sometimes I feel like I'm not the one in charge of that decision making. I'm the one being told this is how we need to act, and I can provide input. But yeah, I'm just wondering, I guess, what your advice is for that kind of situation.
And I don't think that's isolated. Can everyone relate to that? Yeah, see? Hello, you're representing the room here. We've all been in situations like that, whether it's that specifically or not. A useful way that you can approach something like that is take the fact that that experience occurred and suggest that everyone get together and have a debrief. It's like, okay, this has occurred, we got out of it this time because it just petered out. What if it doesn't happen next time? What if it's different? What if it blows up? We need to be prepared. Everybody had really useful things to say, but they weren't always in agreement. Wouldn't it be awesome if we sat down as a team and actually came to a unified position on how to deal with this kind of thing and use it to grow your team, use it to be prepared, knowing that in the moment, in the heat of the moment, it's difficult to actually get that happening because people will be protective of their little bit, or they might be defensive, they might be reactive. It's very difficult to actually bring people together at that time. If you can get them together now, and you can all do this, you can say, oh, like I was attending this thing and we talked about crises that can occur. Wouldn't it be awesome if we sat down with X, Y, and Z and all these people from the team and actually work out how we're going to deal with certain things? It will strengthen your approach as an organisation. So thank you, that's a really valuable question, and I'm way out of time, so we're going to stop. Thank you.